The flight attendant's heels clicked sharply against the aisle. Her voice thundered. You don't belong in first class. Every head turned. Phones lifted. The cabin holding its breath. The woman in the faded sweater didn't flinch, didn't move. Stand up now, or I'll call security, the attendant barked. But when the woman reached slowly into her bag, silence fell. What happened next shocked everyone and set off a chain of events no one saw coming. Stay with me, this is a story you need to hear. Before we start the story, comment below and let us know where in the world you're watching from today. And if you find this story impactful, don't forget to subscribe for more. The cabin lights glowed softly as passengers boarded the luxury flight from New York to London. The air smelled of fresh leather and coffee. People were settling into their seats, chatting, adjusting bags, and scrolling on their phones. At row 2A, a woman in a simple gray dress quietly placed her small handbag under the seat. Her name was Mary Collins. She looked modest, almost invisible among the wealthy travelers in designer suits and sparkling jewelry. From the aisle, a sharp voice cut through the calm. Excuse me, what do you think you're doing? It was Lauren Parker, the senior flight attendant. Her blonde hair was tied in a perfect bun, her uniform crisp, her eyes cold. She looked down at Mary with irritation. Mary glanced up, her voice soft. I'm just putting my bag away. Lauren scoffed. This section is for first-class passengers. You don't belong here. Move to the back. Several passengers turned their heads. A businessman in a navy suit raised an eyebrow. A young couple whispered to each other. Mary stayed calm. This is my seat. 2A. Lauren's lips curled into a smirk. Impossible. These seats cost more than your entire wardrobe. Don't embarrass yourself. Show me your ticket. Mary reached into her purse, but Lauren snatched the boarding pass before she could hand it over. She scanned it quickly, then laughed. This must be a mistake. I'll have it corrected. You need to get up now. Mary's eyes didn't waver. I'll stay here. This is my seat. Lauren leaned closer, her voice sharp enough for nearby passengers to hear. Listen, don't make a scene. People like you don't sit in first class. You're holding up the boarding process. The businessman across the aisle, David Miller, frowned. He tapped his fingers on the armrest, watching carefully. Mary's hands rested calmly on her lap. She didn't argue, didn't raise her voice. She simply said, You're making a mistake. Lauren's cheeks flushed with annoyance. A mistake? The only mistake here is you thinking you belong in this section. The murmurs grew louder. A woman in pearls whispered to her friend, Why is she being so harsh? The poor lady looks harmless. Lauren straightened, her voice louder now. Stand up or I'll call security to remove you. Mary looked at her steadily, her tone even. Do what you must. The tension in the cabin thickened. The hum of the engines seemed louder against the silence of the passengers. Lauren turned on her heel, muttering, Unbelievable. She stormed toward the front of the plane, leaving Mary seated quietly, her eyes fixed on the window. David leaned slightly toward Mary. Are you all right? Mary gave a small nod. I'm fine. Some people judge too quickly. David studied her for a moment, then smiled faintly. I have a feeling you're not as ordinary as you look. Mary didn't reply. She simply folded her hands and waited. At the front, Lauren whispered angrily to another attendant, Grace Turner, a younger woman with kind eyes. Grace looked uncomfortable, glancing back at Mary. Are you sure? Grace asked softly. Her ticket said 2A. Lauren hissed, She doesn't belong here. I'll handle it. Grace bit her lip, but said nothing. The boarding continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. Passengers exchanged glances, some shaking their heads at Lauren's behavior. Mary remained calm, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. The stage was set. Something was about to happen that no one on that flight would forget. What would you do if someone treated you unfairly in public like this? Stay calm like Mary, or speak up loudly. The last passengers were still boarding, but the tension in first class had not faded. Mary sat quietly in seat 2A, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She looked out of the window, as if the commotion hadn't touched her, but everyone around her could feel the weight of what had just happened. Lauren returned, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. She carried a forced smile, but her eyes burned with irritation. She leaned down toward Mary again. I spoke the gate staff. They'll be here soon to correct this mistake. You'll be moved to economy where you belong. Mary didn't flinch. I told you this is my seat. Lauren's voice rose, drawing more attention. Do you think you can just sit here because you printed a fake ticket? People like you try this all the time. It won't work. Gasps rippled through the cabin. A woman in pearls shook her head. That's too much, she whispered to her friend. David Miller, the businessman across the aisle, finally spoke. His tone was calm but firm. Excuse me, Mississippi. I saw her boarding pass. It clearly said 2A. Perhaps you should double-check before accusing her of fraud. Lauren turned on him, her smile tight. Sir, please mind your own business. We know how to handle these situations. David leaned back, his eyes narrowing. It doesn't look like it. Mary remained silent, her calmness almost unsettling. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small notebook, jotting something down. Lauren's eyes flicked to the notebook nervously. Grace, the younger attendant, approached cautiously. Lauren, maybe we should. Lauren cut her off. No, Grace. Don't get involved. This woman is wasting our time. Grace hesitated, then stepped back, her face troubled. The murmurs among passengers grew louder. A man in the back muttered, Why is she treating her like that? Another whispered, She looks so calm, maybe she really is important. Lauren crossed her arms. Stand up now, or I'll have security drag you out before we even take off. Mary looked at her evenly. If you think that's the right thing to do, go ahead. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Lauren's face flushed red. She wasn't used to passengers defying her authority. The captain's voice came over the intercom. Cabin crew, prepare for departure. Lauren forced a smile at the other passengers. Don't worry, everyone. This will be sorted out shortly. But her voice trembled slightly. Mary placed her notebook back in her bag and leaned against the headrest, her expression serene. David watched her closely. You're very calm for someone being threatened with removal. Mary gave a faint smile. Calm is the best answer to arrogance. David chuckled softly. I like that. Lauren, still fuming, stormed toward the galley. Grace followed her, whispering urgently. Lauren, I think you're making a mistake. She doesn't look like someone who's lying. Lauren snapped, You're too soft. People like her try to sneak into first class all the time. I won't let her get away with it. Grace frowned. But what if she really belongs here? Lauren glared at her. Then I'll deal with the consequences later. For now, she's not staying. Back in her seat, Mary closed her eyes briefly, as if gathering her thoughts. The cabin buzzed with whispers, passengers exchanging theories. Some looked at her with pity, others with curiosity. The engines roared to life, and the plane began to taxi. Lauren returned once more, her voice low but sharp. Enjoy this seat while you can. Once we're in the air, you're moving. Mary opened her eyes and looked straight at her. You're very sure of yourself. Lauren smirked. I know my job. Mary's voice was soft, but it carried weight. Your job is to serve with respect. You've already failed. Lauren's smirk faltered for just a second. She turned quickly and walked away, but her steps weren't as confident as before. David leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with interest. I think she has no idea who she's dealing with. Do you? Mary didn't answer. She simply looked out the window as the plane lifted into the sky, and the passengers around her couldn't help but wonder. Who exactly was this quiet woman that the flight attendant was so desperate to push aside? What about you? If you were sitting there, would you step in to defend Mary, or stay silent and watch? The plane had reached cruising altitude. The seatbelt sign blinked off, and passengers began to relax. Drinks were being served, soft chatter filled the cabin, but the tension around seat 2A hadn't faded. Everyone's eyes kept drifting back to Mary. Lauren returned once again, her patience worn thin. She carried a tray of drinks, but her eyes were locked on Mary like a hawk. She set the tray down on a nearby table and leaned in. "I told you before, you don't belong here. This is your last warning. Move, or I'll make sure you regret it." Mary looked up slowly, her calm gaze steady. "You've already made sure of that." Lauren's jaw tightened. She glanced around, noticing the passengers watching. Her pride wouldn't let her back down. She raised her voice. "Everyone here paid thousands of dollars for their seats. And then there's you, sitting here like you deserve it. Enough is enough." Gasps rippled through the cabin. The businessman, David, shook his head in disbelief. "This is harassment," he muttered. Mary remained silent, her hands folded neatly. Her calmness only seemed to fuel Lauren's anger. Finally, Lauren snapped. She reached down, grabbed Mary's arm, and yanked it roughly. "Get up," she barked. The cabin froze. A woman dropped her glass, the sound of shattering crystal echoing through the silence. Grace, the younger attendant, gasped. "Lauren, stop." Mary didn't resist. She simply looked at Lauren, her voice quiet but sharp as a blade. "You just crossed a line you can't erase." Lauren's face flushed red, but she didn't let go. "I don't care who you think you are. You're leaving this seat." David stood up now, his voice firm. "That's enough. You're assaulting a passenger." Other passengers murmured in agreement. Phones were raised discreetly, recording the scene. Mary slowly pulled her arm free, her movements graceful, controlled. She adjusted her sleeve and sat back down. Her voice was calm, but it carried through the cabin. "You've shown everyone here exactly who you are, and soon you'll see who I am." The words hung in the air like thunder. Lauren blinked, suddenly uneasy. For the first time, doubt flickered in her eyes. Grace stepped closer, her voice trembling. "Lauren, please, this isn't right." But Lauren shook her head, trying to regain control. "Don't let her fool you. She's nothing." Mary leaned back, her expression unreadable. She reached for her small handbag, pulled out her phone, and typed something quickly. Then she placed it on the armrest, screen glowing faintly. Lauren's eyes darted to the phone nervously. "What are you doing?" Mary's lips curved into the faintest smile. "You'll find out soon enough." The cabin buzzed with whispers. Passengers leaned toward each other, speculating. "She must be someone important. Did you see how calm she is? That attendant is in trouble." Lauren tried to stand tall, but her confidence was cracking. She turned sharply and stormed toward the galley, muttering under her breath. David sat back down, shaking his head. "Unbelievable. She has no idea what she's just done." Mary looked out the window, her reflection faint in the glass. Her voice was soft, almost to herself. "Respect is not a privilege. It's a right." The passengers around her exchanged glances. Something was building, and they all knew it. If you were sitting there, would you stay silent like most passengers, or would you speak up against injustice? The cabin was heavy with silence after Lauren's outburst. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, some whispering, others staring at Mary with curiosity. The tension was so thick it felt like the air itself had stopped moving. Lauren stood near the galley, her arms crossed, trying to mask her unease. Grace, the younger attendant, approached her again, her voice low but urgent. "Lauren, this isn't right." "You grabbed her. People are recording. If this gets out." Lauren cut her off sharply. "Let them record. She doesn't belong here. I'll prove it." But her voice lacked the confidence it once carried. At that moment, the cockpit door opened. The pilot, Captain James Carter, stepped out. His face was pale, his expression tight. He scanned the cabin, then walked directly toward Lauren. "Step aside," he said firmly. Lauren blinked. "Excuse me? I'm handling this." The captain's eyes flicked to Mary, then back to Lauren. "No, you're not." I just received a call from management. The passenger in seat 2 is not only authorized to be here, she's a VIP. Gasps erupted across the cabin. Heads turned, whispers spread like wildfire. Lauren's face drained of color. That can't be true. The captain's voice was steady. It is. And you've made a serious mistake. Mary remained seated, calm as ever. She didn't gloat, didn't smirk. She simply looked at Lauren with quiet authority. David leaned forward, his voice low but audible. I knew it. I told you she wasn't ordinary. The nosy woman in pearls clutched her necklace, whispering to her friend. She's someone important. I knew it. Lauren stammered, her voice trembling. I didn't know. Mary finally spoke, her tone calm but cutting. You didn't know because you didn't care to look beyond your assumptions. The passengers murmured in agreement. Phones were still raised, capturing every word. The captain straightened. We'll be making an unscheduled landing. Management wants this addressed immediately. The announcement sent ripples of confusion through the cabin. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances, wondering what would happen next. Lauren's confidence crumbled. She looked around desperately, but no one came to her defense. Grace stood silently, her eyes filled with sympathy for Mary. Mary leaned back, her voice soft but firm. Respect is not optional. It's the foundation of service. The captain nodded. Understood, ma'am. Lauren's hands shook slightly as she tried to compose herself. Please. I didn't mean. Mary raised a hand, silencing her. You meant every word. And now you'll face the consequences. The engines hummed steadily as the plane began its descent. Outside the window, the city lights grew closer. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. Every passenger knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. The businessman David whispered to the man beside him, "This is going to change everything." And as the plane touched down smoothly, the cabin braced for what was to come. If you were in that cabin, would you feel relieved that justice was coming or nervous about what might happen next? The plane rolled to a smooth stop on the private runway. Outside the window, the glow of floodlights revealed a sleek black SUV waiting on the tarmac. Its tinted windows reflected the aircraft's lights, and two sharply dressed assistants stepped out, their movements brisk and purposeful. Inside the cabin, passengers craned their necks to see what was happening. Whispers filled the air. Why are we landing here? Who are those people? Is this about that woman in 2A? Lauren stood frozen near the galley, her face pale. She had been so sure of herself minutes ago, but now her confidence was unraveling. Grace, the younger attendant, shifted nervously, glancing between Mary and the door. The cabin door opened with a hiss, and the assistants ascended the steps with quiet authority. Their presence alone commanded attention. One of them, a tall man in a tailored suit, spoke warmly as he reached Mary's seat. "Miss Collins, everything is ready for your review." Gasps rippled through the cabin. Passengers turned wide-eyed toward Mary, who rose slowly from her seat. She adjusted her blazer with calm precision, her every movement radiating control. Lauren's lips parted, but no words came out. She looked from Mary to the assistants, her face draining of color. "Miss Collins," she stammered. Mary's gaze swept across the cabin, her voice steady. "Yes, Mary Collins. And I am not just a passenger. I am the owner of this airline." The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Phones were raised higher, recording every second. The nosy woman in pearls audibly gasped, clutching her necklace. David, the businessman, gave a small nod, as though confirming what he had suspected all along. Lauren stumbled back a step, her voice trembling. That can't be true. There must be some mistake." Mary's eyes locked on her, calm but sharp. "The only mistake here was yours." The assistants stood firmly at Mary's side, their focus entirely on her. One leaned closer. "Do you need anything before we proceed, ma'am?" Mary shook her head gently. "No, I have everything I need." The passengers sat in stunned silence, the atmosphere electric. They had just witnessed the shift of power. An ordinary-looking woman revealed as the one who held all authority. Lauren's hands clenched at her sides. She wanted to argue, to defend herself, but the weight of the truth pressed down on her. She could feel every pair of eyes on her, judging, condemning. Mary stepped forward, her voice calm but commanding. "Lauren, your behavior today has been disgraceful. You humiliated yourself, mistreated a passenger, and tarnished the reputation of this airline." Lauren's knees weakened. I didn't know," she whispered. Mary raised a hand, silencing her. "You didn't know because you didn't care. You judged me by my appearance, and you failed your duty." The passengers murmured in agreement. Grace lowered her eyes, ashamed of her colleagues' actions. Mary turned to the cabin at large. "To everyone here, I apologize for what you had to witness. This is not the standard of service I expect on my planes. Moving forward, every passenger will be treated with dignity and respect." Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then stronger. David clapped firmly, his expression approving. Even the nosy woman in pearls joined in, her admiration shining through. Lauren stood frozen, her face pale, her confidence shattered. She had no defense left. And as Mary's assistants guided her toward the exit, the passengers knew they had just witnessed a moment that would be remembered long after the flight was over. If you were sitting in that cabin, would you feel proud to see justice served, or shocked that someone so simple-looking held such power? The cabin was silent, every passenger holding their breath as Mary stood in the aisle. The assistants flanked her, their presence commanding, but it was Mary's calm voice that carried the most weight. Lauren's knees felt weak. She had mocked this woman, grabbed her arm, humiliated her in front of everyone. Now, the truth was unfolding before her eyes. Mary turned slowly, addressing the passengers first. "You all witnessed what happened here. A woman was judged, insulted, and nearly thrown out of her rightful seat. Why? Because of how she looked." The murmurs grew louder. Heads nodded. Phones kept recording. Mary's gaze shifted to Lauren, who stood frozen, her face pale. "You assumed I was less. You assumed I didn't belong. But let me make this clear." She reached into her bag and pulled out a sleek black card, embossed with the airline's crest. She held it up for all to see. "This is a VIP owner's pass. It grants me access to any seat on any flight at any time. Because I don't just fly with this airline. I own it." Gasps filled the cabin. The nosy woman in pearls clutched her chest. David leaned back with a satisfied smile. "I knew it," he whispered. Lauren's lips trembled. You own the airline?" Mary's voice was calm, but it cut like steel. "Yes. And you, Lauren, chose to humiliate the very person who signs your paycheck." The weight of her words crashed over the cabin. Passengers exchanged stunned looks. Grace, the younger attendant, lowered her head, ashamed of her colleague's behavior. Mary stepped closer to Lauren, her eyes steady. "Do you understand what you've done? You didn't just insult me. You insulted every passenger who has ever been judged unfairly. You showed them what arrogance looks like." Lauren's voice cracked. I didn't know. I thought." Mary raised a hand, silencing her. "You thought wrong. And now, everyone here has seen the truth." The assistants handed Mary a slim folder. She opened it calmly, scanning the contents before looking back at Lauren. "Effective immediately, you are suspended from duty. You will not serve another passenger until this matter is reviewed." Lauren's face crumpled. "Please, I need this job." Mary's expression softened only slightly. "Then you should have respected it. Respect is the foundation of service. Without it, you have nothing." The passengers erupted into applause. Some clapped hesitantly, others with conviction. David clapped firmly, his eyes never leaving Mary. Even Grace joined in, her face filled with relief that justice was being served. Mary turned back to the passengers, her voice warm but strong. I thank you all for your patience. This flight will continue as planned. And I promise you, this airline will always stand for dignity and respect. The applause grew louder, echoing through the cabin. Lauren sank into a nearby seat, her head bowed, her pride shattered. Mary returned to her seat, calm as ever, as though nothing had happened. But the passengers knew they had just witnessed something unforgettable. If you were in that cabin, would you feel inspired by Mary's calm strength, or shocked that someone so powerful could look so ordinary? The applause in the cabin slowly faded, but the weight of the moment remained. Mary stood tall in the aisle, her presence commanding without effort. Lauren sat slumped in a nearby seat, her uniform suddenly feeling like a costume she no longer deserved to wear. Mary's assistants handed her a slim folder, and she opened it with calm precision. Inside were reports, staff evaluations, and passenger feedback records. She scanned them briefly, then closed the folder and looked directly at Lauren. Lauren Parker, she said evenly, her voice carrying through the cabin. You are hereby suspended from duty. Effective immediately. You will not serve another passenger until this matter is fully reviewed by the board. Lauren's lips trembled. Please. I've worked here for years. I didn't mean. Mary raised a hand, silencing her. You meant every word you said. You judged me by my appearance. You humiliated me in front of others. And worst of all, you forgot the first rule of service, respect. The passengers nodded, murmuring in agreement. David leaned forward, his voice firm. She's right. We all saw it. You went too far. Mary continued, her tone calm but sharp. This is not just about me. It's about every passenger who has ever been treated unfairly. Today, you became the example of what will no longer be tolerated. Lauren's eyes filled with tears. I need this job. Please give me another chance. Mary's gaze softened slightly, but her words remained steady. Second chances are earned through humility, not arrogance. You will have time to reflect. Whether you return depends on what you learn from this. Grace, the younger attendant, stepped forward nervously. Miss Collins. I tried to stop her. I didn't know what to do. Mary turned to her, her expression gentler. And you will be given training. You showed hesitation, but you also showed conscience. That matters. Grace's eyes widened with relief. Thank you, ma'am. Mary faced the passengers again. To all of you, I apologize for what you witnessed. This airline belongs to you as much as it belongs to me. You deserve dignity, safety, and respect every time you fly. That is my promise. Applause broke out again, stronger this time. Some passengers even stood, clapping with conviction. David smiled, his eyes gleaming with admiration. The nosy woman in pearls dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. Lauren sat silently, her head bowed, her pride shattered. She had no defense left. Mary returned to her seat, her calmness unshaken. She looked out the window, the city lights glowing below, and whispered softly, respect is not a privilege. It is a right. The passengers around her exchanged glances, their respect for her growing with every passing moment. If you were in that cabin, would you feel that Lauren deserved a second chance? Or do you think suspension was the only fair outcome? The cabin was still buzzing after Mary's declaration. Passengers whispered to one another, some in awe, others in disbelief. Phones were still raised, recording every moment. Lauren sat stiffly in a corner seat, her face pale, her hands trembling. Mary remained calm, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. She turned to her assistants. Begin the process. One of them, a tall man named Richard Hayes, stepped forward. He carried a slim tablet and began typing quickly. Ma'am, I've already contacted headquarters. A formal report has been filed. The legal department is preparing the suspension notice. Lauren's eyes widened. Legal department. Mary's gaze shifted to her. Yes. When you humiliate a passenger, it's a customer service issue. But when you assault one, it becomes a legal matter. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Grace, the younger attendant, covered her mouth with her hand. "Assault?" she whispered. Mary's voice was steady. "You grabbed me. You threatened me. That is unacceptable on any level." Richard continued, his tone professional. "The Civil Aviation Authority will be notified. The footage recorded by passengers will be submitted as evidence. This will not be swept under the rug." Lauren's face crumpled. "Please, I didn't mean to hurt you. I was just—" Mary cut her off. "You were just arrogant. You were just careless. And now you will face the consequences." The passengers murmured in agreement. David leaned forward, his voice firm. "She's right. We all saw it. You crossed the line." Mary nodded slightly. "This is not about revenge. It's about accountability. Every passenger deserves to feel safe. Today, you made this cabin unsafe." Lauren's tears spilled over. "I'll lose everything." Mary's expression softened only slightly. "Then let this be your lesson. Power is not in shouting. Power is in respect." Richard handed Mary the tablet. She signed the suspension notice with a swift stroke of her finger. Then she looked at Lauren one last time. "You are officially relieved of duty. Security will escort you upon landing." The cabin erupted in whispers again. Some passengers clapped quietly. Others simply stared in shock. Grace lowered her head, ashamed but also relieved that justice was being served. Mary turned to the passengers, her voice warm but strong. "I know this has been uncomfortable for all of you, but I want you to remember something. Dignity is not negotiable. If you ever feel mistreated, speak up. Silence only protects the arrogant." The applause grew louder this time, echoing through the cabin. David clapped firmly, his respect for Mary clear in his eyes. Even the nosy woman in pearls joined in, her admiration shining through. Lauren sat silently, her pride shattered, her future uncertain. The weight of her actions pressed down on her like a stone. Mary returned to her seat, her calmness unshaken. She looked out the window, the city lights glowing below, and whispered softly, "Respect is the law above all laws." If you were in that cabin, would you feel sympathy for Lauren now that she faces legal consequences? Or do you believe justice must be firm no matter what? The cabin was alive with whispers and murmurs. What had started as a humiliating scene had transformed into a moment of justice that no one on board would ever forget. Passengers leaned across aisles, sharing their thoughts in hushed voices, while others kept their phones raised, recording every second. Mary sat calmly in her seat, her posture straight, her expression serene. She had said what needed to be said, and now the weight of her authority filled the air. David, the businessman across the aisle, leaned toward her. "Miss Collins, I have to say, I've never seen anyone handle a situation with such composure. You didn't raise your voice once, and yet you commanded the entire room." Mary gave a small smile. Respect doesn't need to shout. It speaks for itself. The woman in pearls, who had earlier whispered doubts, now leaned forward eagerly. "I must apologize. At first, I thought you didn't belong here. But now I see I was wrong. You carry yourself with such dignity." Mary nodded politely. "We all make judgments. What matters is whether we learn from them." The applause began again, this time more spontaneous, more heartfelt. Passengers clapped not just for Mary, but for the principle she stood for. Even Grace, the younger attendant, joined in, her eyes shining with relief. Lauren sat silently in the corner, her head bowed. The applause was like a wave crashing over her, a reminder of how far she had fallen in just a few hours. Mary turned to Grace. "You showed hesitation, but you also showed conscience. That matters. People will remember that you tried to do the right thing." Grace's eyes widened. "Thank you, ma'am. I promise I'll do better." Mary's assistants stepped forward, addressing the passengers. On behalf of the airline, we thank you for your patience. This incident will be handled with the seriousness it deserves. Your safety and dignity are our highest priorities." The passengers nodded, reassured. Some even began to smile, the tension finally easing. A man in the back called out, "It's about time someone stood up for respect." His words were met with cheers and more applause. David leaned closer to Mary again. "You've not only defended yourself, you've inspired everyone here. People will remember this flight for the rest of their lives." Mary's gaze swept across the cabin, her voice calm but strong. "If even one person leaves this flight believing that dignity is worth defending, then it was worth it." The passengers clapped once more, louder than before. The sound filled the cabin, echoing like a promise of change. Lauren remained silent, her pride shattered, her future uncertain. But for everyone else, the atmosphere had shifted. What had begun as humiliation had become a lesson in strength, respect, and justice. If you were one of those passengers, would you join the applause with pride, or would you sit quietly, reflecting on your own judgments? By the time the plane landed at its final destination, the story had already left the cabin and entered the world outside. Passengers who had recorded the incident uploaded clips to social media before even stepping off the aircraft. Within minutes, the videos began to spread. Headlines appeared online. "Flight attendant humiliates passenger. Shocked when she turns out to be the airline owner." Comments flooded in. "This is unbelievable. She stayed so calm. That's real power." Finally, someone stood up for respect. Mary walked through the terminal with her assistants at her side. Cameras flashed as reporters rushed forward. Microphones extended. "Miss Collins, is it true you own the airline?" one shouted. "What will happen to the flight attendant?" another asked. Mary paused, her calm presence silencing the chaos. She spoke clearly, her voice carrying authority. "Yes, I am the owner of this airline. What happened on that flight was unacceptable. No passenger should ever be judged by appearance. Respect is a right, not a privilege." The reporters scribbled furiously, cameras rolling. Her words spread instantly, quoted across news outlets, and shared thousands of times online. David, the businessman who had defended her, was interviewed as well. "I've traveled for years, but I've never seen someone handle injustice with such composure. She didn't raise her voice once, and yet she commanded the entire cabin. That's leadership." Grace, the younger attendant, also spoke to the press. "I regret not standing up sooner, but I'm grateful Miss Collins gave me another chance. I've learned a lesson I'll never forget." Meanwhile, Lauren avoided the cameras, escorted quietly by security. Her face was pale, her eyes downcast. The world now knew her name, but not for the reasons she had once hoped. Back at headquarters, the airline released an official statement. "We deeply regret the incident that occurred on Flight 247. Our owner, Miss Mary Collins, has made it clear that respect and dignity are non-negotiable values. Immediate action has been taken, and further training will be implemented across all staff." The statement only fueled the story further. News anchors debated it. Social media users praised Mary's calm strength, and hashtags like #RespectIsRight and #MaryCollins began trending worldwide. Mary herself remained composed. In a brief television interview, she said, "This was never about me. It was about a principle. If even one person learns that dignity matters more than status, then the lesson was worth it." Her words resonated deeply. People shared the clip, quoting her line, "Respect is a right, not a privilege." It became the defining phrase of the entire incident. Back in her office days later, Mary sat by the window, watching the city lights. Her assistant Richard entered with a stack of reports. "Ma'am, the public response has been overwhelming. Bookings have actually increased. People say they trust the airline more now than ever." Mary smiled faintly. "Trust is built on respect. If we keep that promise, the rest will follow." Richard nodded. The world is calling you an icon of dignity. Mary shook her head gently. I'm not an icon. I'm just a reminder that power doesn't need to shout. It only needs to stand firm. The story had started with humiliation, but it ended with inspiration. And for millions watching around the world, Mary Collins became a symbol of quiet strength. If you saw this story on the news, would you share it to inspire others? Or would you keep it as a personal reminder about the power of respect? Days later, the frenzy of headlines and social media posts began to calm. The world had already absorbed the story of the flight, and Mary Collins had become a symbol of quiet strength. Yet for Mary, life returned to its usual rhythm. She never sought fame. She only wanted respect to be the foundation of her airline. At the company headquarters, staff moved with a new sense of purpose. Training sessions were underway, emphasizing dignity and empathy. Posters lined the walls with Mary's words, "Respect is a right, not a privilege." Employees whispered about her calmness, her composure, and how she had turned a humiliating moment into a lesson for the entire industry. Grace, the younger attendant, walked into the training hall nervously. She had been given a second chance, and she intended to prove she deserved it. The instructor smiled at her. "You're here because you showed conscience. That matters. Learn from it, and you'll become stronger." Grace nodded, determination in her eyes. Meanwhile, Lauren's name had faded from the headlines, but within the company, her case was still under review. Some felt she deserved another chance. Others believed her arrogance had gone too far. Mary had left the decision to the board, refusing to let personal feelings dictate justice. Mary herself sat quietly in her office, reviewing reports. Richard, her assistant, entered with a smile. "Ma'am, passenger satisfaction has risen by 20% since the incident. People say they feel safer flying with us now." Mary looked up, her expression calm. "That's good. But numbers don't matter if the lesson is forgotten. Respect must be lived, not just measured." Later that week, Mary boarded another flight, this time without assistants or cameras. She wore the same simple gray dress, carrying the same small handbag. Passengers barely noticed her as she took her seat. She preferred it that way. The flight attendants greeted her warmly, their smiles genuine. Grace was among them, her posture straighter, her voice steadier. She offered Mary a drink with a respectful nod. Mary accepted it with a faint smile, saying only, "Thank you." The cabin was peaceful. Passengers chatted softly, attendants moved with care, and the atmosphere felt lighter than before. Mary leaned back in her seat, gazing out the window at the clouds drifting by. For her, this was the true victory. Not the headlines, not the applause, but the quiet change in culture. A shift that meant every passenger, no matter how they looked, would be treated with dignity. David, the businessman from the earlier flight, happened to be on board again. He recognized her and leaned across the aisle with a smile. "Back to flying quietly, I see." Mary chuckled softly. "That's how I prefer it." David nodded. "Still, you've changed more than you realize. People are talking about you everywhere. You've become a reminder that power doesn't need to shout." Mary's eyes softened. "If people remember the lesson, not me, then I've done my job." The plane soared higher, the hum of the engine steady. Passengers relaxed, unaware that the quiet woman in 2-8 had once again ensured their dignity was protected. And as Mary closed her eyes, she thought to herself, true power is not in being seen, but in making sure others are respected. If you were on that flight, would you recognize Mary and thank her for what she did, or would you let her remain the quiet guardian of respect? The sun was setting as Mary's car drove quietly through the city. The golden light reflected off the tall glass buildings, painting the skyline in warm colors. Inside the car, Mary sat in silence, her thoughts drifting back to the flight that had changed so much. She hadn't planned for any of it. She had boarded like any other passenger, dressed simply, carrying only a small handbag. Yet in a few hours, she had been insulted, humiliated, and then forced to reveal who she truly was. What began as an act of arrogance from one flight attendant had turned into a lesson for the entire world. Her assistant Richard glanced at her from the front seat. "Ma'am, the media is still buzzing. Your words are everywhere. People are calling you the voice of dignity." Mary smiled faintly. "I don't want to be a voice. I want to be a reminder. Respect is not something you give only to the powerful. It belongs to everyone." The car slowed as they passed a busy street. Mary looked out the window. She saw a young man helping an elderly woman cross the road. She saw a shopkeeper greeting a customer with a smile. Small acts of respect, unnoticed by most, but powerful in their own way. She thought of Grace, the younger attendant who had hesitated but tried to do the right thing. She thought of David, the businessman who had spoken up when others stayed silent. And she even thought of Lauren, whose arrogance had sparked the entire chain of events. Perhaps, Mary hoped, Lauren would learn from her mistake and return one day with humility. Later that evening, Mary sat by her office window, the city lights glowing like stars below. She opened her notebook and wrote a single line. "Power is not in wealth or titles. Power is in how you treat others." She closed the notebook and leaned back, her heart calm. The world would move on, the headlines would fade, but the lesson would remain. And that was enough. The next morning, Mary boarded another flight. She walked quietly down the aisle, unnoticed by most. She sat in her seat, folded her hands, and smiled at the attendant who greeted her warmly. No one knew they were serving the owner of the airline. And that was exactly how she wanted it. Because true power doesn't need to be announced. It only needs to be lived. Mary stood before a room filled with her airline staff. The atmosphere was tense, every attendant and crew member waiting to hear what she would say. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't pace the stage. She simply stood with her hands folded in front of her, her calm presence commanding more attention than any loud speech could. "I know many of you have heard about what happened on Flight 247, she began softly. Some of you have read the headlines, some of you have seen the videos. But I don't want you to remember it as a scandal. I want you to remember it as a lesson." The room was silent. Even the sound of breathing seemed to fade. Mary's eyes moved slowly across the faces in front of her. "We are not here to serve food and drinks. We are not here just to guide passengers to their seats. We are here to protect dignity. Every person who steps onto one of our planes carries a story you cannot see. Some may look wealthy, some may look poor, but all of them deserve the same respect. That is not optional. That is the foundation of who we are." Grace, sitting in the front row, felt her chest tighten. She remembered her hesitation on that flight, the way she had almost stayed silent. Mary's words struck her like a promise she needed to keep. Mary continued, her voice steady. "Power is not in uniforms or in titles or in the authority to command. Power is in restraint. Power is in kindness. Power is in the ability to treat someone with dignity even when you think they don't deserve it. Because the truth is, dignity is not something you earn. It is something you already have, simply by being human." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Some attendants lowered their eyes, ashamed of moments when they had judged too quickly. Others sat taller, inspired to carry this lesson forward. Mary paused, letting the silence stretch. Then she said, "I don't want you to remember me. I want you to remember the woman in the gray sweater. I want you to remember how quickly judgment can blind us, and how easily respect can restore balance. If you carry that lesson with you, then this airline will not just fly people across the world. It will carry dignity across the skies." The staff broke into quiet applause, not the loud, chaotic kind, but the kind that came from hearts moved by truth. Grace wiped her eyes, whispering to herself, "I'll never forget." Mary stepped down from the stage, her expression calm, her steps unhurried. She didn't need to say more. The lesson had already taken root. And as she walked out of the hall, the staff knew They had not just heard a speech. They had witnessed a reminder that respect, once given, could change not only a flight, but an entire world. True power is not in wealth or titles, but in the respect you give to others. If this story inspired you, subscribe for more stories where dignity always wins. And tell me, what lesson did you take from Mary's journey today?